Donald Trump again today invoked what he calls Canada's reliance on the U.S.
Tonight, I am announcing Canada will be responding to the U.S. trade action.
The U.S. auto industry is facing a major crisis, but the twist?
What is going on with the UK, the European, the US car industry right now?
This time, the threat isn't coming from China or Europe. It's coming from our closest neighbor, Canada. That's right, our biggest trade partner has just made a move that could skyrocket car prices, create chaos in manufacturing, and even lead to thousands of American jobs being shipped overseas. Now, this isn't just a simple tariff disagreement. Big players like Tesla, Ford, and General Motors are all caught in the middle of a tense showdown, and the entire North American automotive market is teetering on the edge. What started as a dispute over trade rules has now evolved into a full-blown economic standoff. We're talking about billions of dollars at risk, with the future of the electric vehicle industry hanging by a thread. If things escalate further, we might see factory closures, layoffs, and a massive disruption to the EV sector that no one saw coming. What does this mean for the future of U.S. car manufacturing? Today, we're going deep into how Canada's strategic counterattack could destabilize the U.S. auto sector, why this move could push Tesla and other EV manufacturers to the brink, and the political battles fueling this trade war. With factory workers on edge, automakers scrambling to adjust, and an election year around the corner, the stakes have never been higher. This trade war might just change the game for the entire auto industry. Will it backfire on the US, or is Canada making a bold move that could shift the balance of power? Canada strikes back, a precision attack on the US auto sector. Instead of making an emotional or hasty decision, Canada has strategically plotted its response, hitting the US where it will hurt the most. In retaliation for the US's harsh 25% tariff on Canadian goods,
U.S. President Donald Trump has signed an order to levy 25% tariffs on imports from Canada.
Canada has decided to fight back, but not in the way you might expect. Rather than blanket tariffs across all sectors, Canada has carefully chosen industries that will have a real impact on key political players and powerful corporations. Among the hardest-hit areas, U.S. agriculture, bourbon exports from Kentucky, and, perhaps most damaging, the American automotive industry. The Canadian government's decision to impose severe tariffs on electric vehicles and crucial auto components has already sent shock waves through the market. With billions of dollars of trade flowing across the border every year, this is more than just an inconvenience. It's a disruption of an entire industry. This isn't just an economic decision, it's a powerful message. Canada is showing it's ready to push back and make sure that any restrictions hurt the US just as badly. If not worse, then they hurt Canada. What began as a typical trade squabble is now escalating into a full-fledged war of influence.
Is the date for U.S. tariffs to go into effect unless Canadian officials...
With massive economic consequences hanging in the balance. So, how much damage will this cost the American economy before the U.S. government steps in to make things right? And Canada isn't done yet. The most significant blow is still ahead, and it's aimed squarely at Tesla, the face of American electric vehicle innovation. Tesla's reliance on Canadian-sourced materials like nickel, lithium, and aluminum, which are critical for building batteries, makes the company particularly vulnerable. Now, with new tariffs on these essential imports, Tesla's supply chain could face serious disruption, and the impact could be devastating. The result? Skyrocketing production costs, which could force Tesla to make some tough choices, raise vehicle prices and risk alienating consumers, or scale back production, stalling the company's growth and hurting profits. Investors are on edge, and it's clear why.
Tesla car sales in Europe were down.
Tesla's stock has been all over the place as the fear of a supply chain disaster intensifies. But Tesla isn't alone in this crisis. The entire U.S. electric vehicle, EV, market is now feeling the heat. Major players like Ford, General Motors, and Rivian, all of whom depend on vital materials from Canada, are being pulled into the storm. The price of raw materials is skyrocketing, and with it the cost of making electric vehicles. Consumers already struggling with inflation may soon find EVs completely out of reach. The real irony here? The Biden administration has pushed hard for the transition to EVs, touting it as a key pillar in the fight against climate change.
President Biden has launched a new government effort to fight global warming.
Yet, this trade war might derail those very goals before the industry can even achieve mass adoption. The higher the prices, the less likely consumers are to make the switch from traditional vehicles to electric. This could set the EV industry back years, if not longer. And just when it seems like the crisis couldn't get worse, it does. The entire North American auto supply chain is beginning to crumble. The auto industry's breaking point. The North American auto industry is one of the most interconnected in the world. Parts for a single car often cross the US-Canada border multiple times before the vehicle is fully assembled. But now, with tariffs hitting every corner of the supply chain, that once smooth process is starting to break down. Automakers are scrambling to find solutions, but the damage is already being done. For decades, manufacturers in the US and Canada have relied on a seamless, tariff-free flow of materials. Aluminum, steel, chips, batteries, even glass, all essential parts of modern vehicles. These materials are shipped back and forth between the two countries multiple times before reaching the production line. Now, with new tariffs driving up costs by billions, car makers are facing some tough decisions. Ford has already signaled potential layoffs at plants that rely on Canadian-made parts. General Motors has scaled back production at certain plants due to supply chain bottlenecks. The biggest fear? Factory closures and massive job losses, and then there's the issue of prices. Every extra cost in the supply chain gets passed down to consumers, and that could spell disaster for the average American looking to buy a new car. The reality is that buying a vehicle in 2023 is already tough enough, thanks to rising inflation and ongoing chip shortages. If this trade war continues, we could see car prices hit record highs, making it nearly impossible for many families to afford a new car. In the worst-case scenario, the auto industry could find itself in a downward spiral. Fewer cars made, higher prices, and fewer people able to buy them. This trade war could send shockwaves through the US economy, affecting not only car manufacturers but also the millions of workers and consumers who rely on the auto industry. For millions of Americans, the irony couldn't be clearer. These tariffs were meant to protect manufacturing jobs, yet they're doing the exact opposite. Instead of revitalizing factories, they're shutting them down. Layoffs are piling up. Economic uncertainty is growing, and what was supposed to be a lifeline for domestic production is now sinking industries instead. And now, the pressure is mounting. What started as an economic move has turned into a full-blown political battle, one that could decide the fate of upcoming elections. The political fallout. This trade war isn't just about business anymore. It's a political weapon, one that's dividing leaders, swaying voters, and shaping the future of North American relations. Donald Trump has been one of the loudest voices in favor of protectionist policies.
A Trump administration will change our failed trade policies, and I mean quickly.
Donald Trump doubled down on his hardline protectionist trade policies,
claiming that tariffs will force companies to bring jobs back to the US. But in critical swing states, where factories were supposed to be hiring, they're now laying workers off instead. With the 2024 election on the horizon, even some of his strongest supporters are starting to question whether these policies are truly working for American workers. On the other side, Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau has framed this trade war as a fight for national sovereignty. His message? Canada won't be bullied. He's turned retaliatory tariffs into a rallying cry, sparking a wave of national pride. Many Canadians now see this standoff as their chance to push back against US economic dominance. The question is, how long can this standoff last before it spirals into a full-scale crisis? Factory jobs are at risk, prices are climbing, and global markets are reacting to the turmoil. Yet with elections looming on both sides, neither leader wants to be the first to back down. And if this trade war drags on, the damage won't stop at the auto industry. Other sectors could take a hit in ways no one saw coming. If you think things are bad now, imagine what would happen if Canada decided to weaponize its energy exports. The US is heavily dependent on Canadian oil, natural gas, and electricity to keep its economy running. While Canada hasn't played this card yet, the mere possibility is enough to rattle Washington. Right now, Canada is the largest foreign supplier of crude oil to the US, making up nearly half of all American oil imports.
Prime Minister Justin Trudeau says his government is focused on ensuring that punishing tariffs on Canadian exports to the U.S.
If Canada were to cut exports or raise prices, the impact would be immediate. Gas prices would shoot through the roof, inflation would spike, and businesses across the country would feel the pain overnight. And it doesn't stop at oil. Major U.S. cities, New York, Chicago, Detroit, rely on Canadian hydroelectric power. If Canada were to limit electricity exports, the U.S. could face rolling blackouts and grid failures, sending officials scrambling for alternatives. Even though Canada hasn't pulled the trigger on these drastic measures, the message is clear. If the U.S. keeps up these aggressive trade policies, Canada has the power to hit back in ways that could send shockwaves through entire industries. But this isn't just a North American problem anymore. The rest of the world is watching, and the ripple effects are already in motion. Other countries are adjusting their trade policies in response, and one of the biggest winners in all this, China. As tensions rise between the U.S. and Canada, China is stepping in, offering lucrative trade deals on energy, raw materials, and auto parts. If China secures long-term agreements with Canadian suppliers, the U.S. could lose access to critical resources for good, crippling industries and reshaping global trade for years to come. European nations are rethinking their trade alliances. Germany, France, and the UK are looking for more stable partners, exploring new supply chains to avoid the fallout of this ongoing economic standoff. If this shift continues, American companies could lose billions in global trade, losses that might have been avoided if this conflict hadn't spiraled out of control. But it's not just Europe. Developing nations in South America, Africa, and Southeast Asia are seizing this opportunity. With North American trade in disarray, these countries are stepping in to fill the gaps, offering themselves as new suppliers and manufacturing hubs. The result? The U.S. is slowly losing its grip on international markets, further weakening its influence in the global economy. Trade isn't just about money, it's about trust, relationships, and long-term partnerships. And right now, many countries are questioning whether the United States is still a reliable player. While politicians argue over tariffs and trade policies, the people paying the price are everyday Americans. The financial strain is already hitting households across the country.
From the world of business now, low-income Americans are increasingly showing signs of escalating financial strain.
For politicians in Washington, trade wars are a game of strategy. But for millions of American families, it's a fight for survival. Inflation was already a growing concern. Now, with tariffs driving up costs, the price of everything, from groceries to gas to basic household goods, is climbing higher. And one of the hardest hit industries? Automobiles. But it doesn't stop there. Tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum mean construction materials, appliances, and electronics are also getting more expensive. Planning to renovate your home? Upgrade your phone? Buy a new fridge? Expect to pay significantly more. And then there's the job market. The very tariffs that were supposed to protect American workers are now putting them out of work. Businesses that rely on Canadian imports are scrambling to cut costs, leading to factory closures, layoffs, and pay cuts. Thousands of American workers are now unemployed, while those who still have jobs are finding their paychecks don't stretch as far as they used to. This isn't just an economic hiccup. It's a full-blown crisis. And if this trade war doesn't cool down soon, America could be facing one of the worst cost-of-living crises in modern history. This trade war isn't just about North America, it's part of something much bigger. The more the U.S. isolates itself with tariffs and trade restrictions, the more it opens doors for other nations to rise in power. The real question is, where does the U.S. go from here? Will it double down on economic isolation, or will leaders step up to repair trust with key trade partners? The decisions made in the next few months won't just shape current policies. They could determine America's global economic standing for decades to come. The farming crisis and immigration crackdowns. While the trade war dominates headlines, another crisis is brewing, one that could devastate the American farming industry. For decades, American agriculture has relied on migrant labor to keep food production running. These workers, mostly from Mexico and Central America, take on the grueling jobs that few Americans are willing to do.
As the snow melts across American farmland, America's farmers dealing with a different kind of freeze, a freeze on federal funding.
Without them, entire farms could collapse, and food prices would skyrocket. Now, with strict immigration policies and mass deportation threats looming, farmers are sounding the alarm. If these crackdowns move forward, millions of agricultural jobs could go unfilled. That means crops left to rot in the fields, supply shortages in supermarkets, and rising costs for every American household. And this isn't just a theory, it's already happened. In states like Georgia and Alabama, past immigration crackdowns led to immediate labor shortages, forcing farmers to abandon their harvests and lose millions of dollars in revenue. The ripple effects wouldn't stop at farming. The same labor shortages would hit manufacturing, construction, and the service industry, causing disruptions across the entire economy. For decades, American manufacturing was the backbone of the economy. The roaring factories of Detroit, the steel mills of Pennsylvania, these industries once symbolized American strength. But over the past 40 years, those jobs have steadily disappeared, either outsourced to countries with cheaper labor or replaced by automation. And now, that crisis is reaching a breaking point. With rising costs, supply chain disruptions, and a shrinking workforce, American manufacturing is struggling to survive. The very policies meant to protect these jobs are accelerating their decline. And if nothing changes, the U.S. could see even more factories shut down, leaving thousands of workers with nowhere to turn. The trade war with Canada has only added fuel to an already burning crisis. Tariffs on steel, aluminum, and auto parts were supposed to protect American industries, but instead, they've done the opposite. With production costs soaring, factories are slowing operations, cutting jobs, or in some cases, shutting down completely. Rather than keeping jobs in the U.S., manufacturers are now searching for cheaper suppliers overseas, undermining the very industries these tariffs were meant to save. And as factories struggle to stay afloat, the damage is spreading beyond manufacturing. But tariffs are just one part of a much bigger issue. A critical labor shortage is making matters even worse. The vanishing workforce. Across the country, manufacturers and construction firms are facing a serious problem. They can't find enough skilled workers. As older generations retire, fewer young people are stepping into the trades, leaving massive gaps in the workforce. For decades, immigrant workers helped fill these essential roles. But with tighter immigration policies in place, that pipeline is drying up. The result? Factory output is slowing, construction projects are stalling, and businesses are stuck between paying unsustainable wages or moving jobs overseas. And the impact doesn't stop there. When manufacturing slows down, entire industries feel the ripple effect. Small businesses that rely on factory orders are seeing their profits shrink. Trucking and logistics companies are losing work as shipments decline. Industrial towns that once thrived on manufacturing are now on the verge of collapse. Cities like Flint, Michigan, and Youngstown, Ohio, are grim reminders of what happens when an industry disappears. Abandoned factories, rising unemployment, and communities left behind. Even without tariffs or labor shortages, the economy is already under serious pressure. Inflation and rising interest rates are making it harder for both businesses and consumers to stay afloat. Over the past 3 years, the cost of everything, food, rent, gas, has skyrocketed, stretching family budgets to the breaking point. While wages have increased in some sectors, they haven't kept pace with inflation, leaving millions struggling to afford basic necessities. Now, with interest rates climbing, borrowing money has become more expensive than ever. Businesses that need loans to expand or cover costs are forced to scale back or shut down. Home buyers are being priced out of the market as mortgage rates soar. Credit card debt is piling up, making it even harder for households to stay above water. For businesses, higher interest rates are a major roadblock. The cost of borrowing has skyrocketed, making it harder for companies to expand, invest in equipment, or even keep their workforce intact. As a result, economic growth is stalling, layoffs are increasing, and wages are stagnating. Small businesses, often the backbone of local economies, are being hit the hardest. Many rely on loans just to keep their doors open. Now, with borrowing costs through the roof, they're being forced to cut staff, delay projects, or shut down entirely. The domino effect? A shrinking job market and growing uncertainty about what comes next. For the average consumer, the pressure is even more intense. The American dream on hold. The dream of homeownership is slipping further out of reach. Mortgage rates have climbed so high that buying a home is becoming nearly impossible for younger generations. Those who can't afford to buy are turning to rentals, only to find that prices there are surging too, making affordable housing harder to find. Credit card debt is another growing nightmare. With interest rates climbing, households that were already struggling are now seeing their debt spiral out of control. Every purchase, whether it's groceries, gas, or utilities, costs more, and many families are being pushed deeper into financial instability. And here's the kicker. Even as inflation starts to slow, major corporations are still hiking prices. The rise of shrinkflation means consumers are paying the same price, or more, for smaller products. Whether it's a bag of chips or a box of cereal, people are getting less for their money, further eroding purchasing power. The result? A weaker middle class, declining consumer spending, and an economy teetering on the edge. If spending continues to slow, businesses will struggle even more, leading to further layoffs, store closures, and an even bleaker economic outlook. What happens next? The future of the U.S. economy hinges on the choices made in the coming months. Easing aggressive trade policies could stabilize supply chains and prevent further price hikes. Smarter immigration policies could help businesses find the workers they desperately need. Careful economic management could ensure inflation remains under control without triggering a major recession. The reality is simple. If the U.S. adapts, it can rebuild its industrial strength, restore global trust, and remain a dominant economic force. But if it continues on this current path of trade isolation, labor shortages, and rising costs, it risks falling behind as other nations rise to power. The next few years will determine everything. Will the U.S. take the necessary steps to secure its economic future? Or is this the beginning of a long-term decline? The world is watching, and the stakes couldn't be higher. What do you think? Can America recover from this crisis, or are we witnessing a turning point in global economic power? Drop your thoughts in the comments below.